Hello everyone, and thank you for coming back to yet another episode of The Gloving Paradigm. I am your host Peter, aka LPD Dubuque, and this week is going to be a very interesting week because I'm going to be tackling something I feel has been a little underutilized, and I wish that we can expound more onto this. So, what is it that I'm talking about? It's very simple. I'm going to be talking about accelerometers and gloving. Okay, so first things first. What is an accelerometer? The reason why I'm telling you guys this is because I've been asked this question, so I might as well just explain it so you guys can understand. So an accelerometer is basically a little device. In this case, when it comes to gloving, it's going to be inside of your chip. It's a little sensor type thing that will activate when certain conditions are met. And what conditions are those? It's basically a certain speed or a certain impact velocity should happen to cause a change. Okay, your phone uses this all the time. So when you turn your phone sideways and your screen turns sideways, it's using the accelerometer to do so. Mobile games use this for either tilting or shaking or what have you that will activate it. So it is something that you guys have been using pretty much every day for as long as smartphones have been around that I've used accelerometers, okay? So what is the purpose of this in gloving? Well, it is to simply just change the configuration of your lights when you actually hit a certain speed or an orientation or impact velocity. So let's just use, the two big examples that have been out there for right now are the futuristic lights atoms, and then you also have, basically, you have the elements from Amazing Lights, but you also have the spectra. I'm just going to use the elements since that was the first one that they did. Okay, those are your big ones that use the accelerometer. It's one of their main features. Okay, one of the biggest conundrums that I was noticing is just a lack of usage or just a lack of video evidence of usage. Okay, and I'm not saying that this is a good or a bad thing. It was just something I wasn't seeing a whole lot of, and I was kind of confused by that. And the reason is because, the accelerometer adds this whole level of capabilities now in terms of movement that we can utilize. Taking into account of your movements and the speed and things of that nature, it does bring a whole different dynamic to the performance altogether. A whole set of dynamics, really. And this also brings about a whole different train of thought when it comes to utilizing the accelerometers. Okay, especially when it comes to certain concepts. And that's one of the things I was just kind of confused on, is that, accelerometers have been introduced into the gloving world as early as 2014, I think, if I remember correctly. I can't remember the exact date. I just remember I was at my mom's house, and if I remember seeing it at my mom's house, it had to be between 2012 and 2014, because I left my hometown in 2014. So, can't exactly remember the exact time, but I want to say 2014. Okay, and the first time this has been introduced into the gloving world was through the kinetics from futuristic lights. Now, the thing that I absolutely love about the kinetics is that its main feature is the accelerometer. The accelerometer is literally the backbone of this chip and everything it does. Okay, you would have settings that you can have where you choose 3 colors, and your slow speed would be your first color. Then it'll add the second color once you get to medium speed, and once you get to the highest speed, then you'll have all 3 colors. And then it also had things like geo mode, where the colors were dictated by the directional orientation of your chips. So your first color would be the upward direction, your second color would be the horizontal direction, and your third color would be the downward direction. Okay, so all this brought a whole different dynamic to gloving altogether, and it did it in a very simple way. Like if you actually look at the kinetic and how it works with the accelerometer, it's very basic in its design in terms of utilization when it comes to the accelerometer. However, something as simple as like the kinetic, using the accelerometer as its main feature, it brought a whole different impact to the entire scene itself. At least in my opinion. I don't know if everyone else agrees with me, but I will definitely say it does change the entire paradigm of gloving, as a whole, really. So I did ask questions about the accelerometers and how people would feel about them, how people have utilized them, and things of that nature. And I definitely want to thank everybody on the Reddit community. Definitely want to thank everybody in the Glover's Lounge and a couple of people in Art of Gloving for actually interacting with me on this question, because it actually helped me really understand where the community sits when it comes to the accelerometers. One big thing that a lot of people have told me is that won't see a whole lot of festival or venue shows due to the fact that these chips are actually the premium products of the chip world, basically. And with certain venues having stricter regulations on gloves, especially when it comes to security, I can definitely understand why people don't use them at festivals or at venues, just for the sheer fact that you do not want to lose a set that you spend probably well towards $150 just to be taken away and possibly blackmailed to give back. That I totally understand. Everyone should already understand where I stand when it comes to those venues or those festivals, any of those organizers that actively bans and pursuantly attacks, well, not necessarily attack, but pursues glovers to confiscate their items. I will refuse to go, no matter, even if I was sponsored by a company and a company was literally sending me out there. I just, as a moral standing for me, I will not go. And it's because I am not going to give these people my money if they're going to actively persecute me, okay? And I know a lot of people out there right now are like, well, we go for the artists to support the artists. I understand that. I definitely understand that. However, there are other ways to support the artists that you want to go see. Most artists nowadays actually have a direct funding, whether it be Patreon or whatever. You can directly fund them instead of giving your money to the middleman, and then they get certain royalties for it, right? But again, that's just me digressing. So definitely understand the festival scene and why people don't really use them there. Actually, one of the people from Futuristic Lights, if I remember correctly, it should be FL Squirtle, that actually commented, which I'm very, very grateful that you actually commented and actually gave me a good, strong feedback about accelerometers in the gloving scene. So one of the things that he was telling me about was certain parameters will result in a lackluster display. What he used as an example is if you went into the sandbox switch mode and you program the 3 settings of the same flashing pattern, he says that you don't really tell if the person has hit the 2nd or the 3rd threshold because of how it's set up. That's totally understandable. I definitely will say that when introducing the accelerometer into the chips, it did bring out a whole new playing field and uncharted territory, basically, of their capabilities. And not only that, is the application of the accelerometer has also just been kind of something that we're still working on. I feel the accelerometer adds such a whole slew of dynamics that I just feel like we haven't really tapped into yet. And I don't blame anyone. It's kind of difficult if you think about it. The whole idea that you're taking into account of how you have to control your speed and your motions and making sure that your impact velocity is on point. Not only that, is trying to avoid any accidental sequence changing on your lights is one of those things that are very, very difficult. And I just feel I don't see enough talk about this where we can actually really work on discussing how people have utilized it in a way. Another great thing that a lot of people tell me is they actually like using it as a way to practice their speed control, which in one sense, yes, I definitely agree, it does help. However, I do feel like if you're using it just for speed control practice, I really feel like you're selling yourself short, because you have a feature now that accents your sense of control in terms of speed. The whole idea that if you know where the parameters fit and you actually get a feel of how fast you have to go to trigger the next sequence, that's gonna propel your ability as a glover altogether, instead of just using it as a way to measure your speed control. Okay, so if you're using it as a way to practice your speed control, that's great. However, I would like it, actually I highly beseech all my listeners that if you have an accelerometer feature, to really actually delve into its capabilities and actually work with it to not necessarily change your entire show altogether, but to really accentuate your show and bring out a whole new level of dynamics, basically. You know, one major thing that I'm actually very glad that Squirtle actually shared with me is that there has been an archetype that has come out of the accelerometer being introduced into the gloving scene, and it's known as teleporting. Now, I'm not going to go into a whole huge set of details about teleporting because I want to reserve that for its own episode where I can really dive into the archetype and really break it down for everybody, and also help people look at ideas and trains of thought to really utilize this archetype. Okay, but the simplest way I can actually explain teleporting to you is that with the configurations that you have on your lights, whether it be the atoms or the elements or the spectras or whatever has the accelerometer, one of the things that they would do is they will have their first sequence be completely blank, so it's turned off. And then they'll have it set up on the setting to be very low, so any slight movement will activate the second sequence, which will actually be lights. So in a way, your movements are being shown, but you're not being shown where you are stopping. You're literally just seeing the motion of point A to point B. You're not seeing the actual point A to point B. You kind of have to visualize that. But this is something I'm extremely excited about now because this is what I was looking for. I was looking for what have people done to really utilize the capabilities of the accelerometers to really create its own performance, basically. And teleporting is that. Okay. Very excited to see where this can be expanded on. I hope people are actually really trying to make teleporting be its own thing, kind of like how impacting is its own thing. As much as people like to disagree with me, impacting is its own thing. Okay, there's just no denying that. And telling me that I'm wrong kind of feels foolish because it's one of the very first archetypes to be created through gloving. Okay, but again, digression. So there's so many things that I'm actually was really wrong on about in terms of usage of these accelerometers, and I'm actually glad that I have been proven wrong, because all my listeners should know that I would rather be proven wrong than no one ever correcting me, because when I am proven wrong, it allows me to learn, and that's one of my biggest things is to learn. As weird as it sounds, I like learning. Okay, it's a weird thing, but it's something I thoroughly enjoy. I like learning new things, and when somebody proves me wrong, I learn from it, and that's just great for me. So there wasn't really a lack of usage. I just think maybe people are just not making enough videos about them, which I can totally understand. You know, people tend to stay with the standard archetype of just turning on your lights, doing the show, and then turning them off. You know, no special changes, none of that. You know, none of that frivolous, or I wouldn't say frivolous, but extravagant things. You know, but to me, I just feel where people have touched the surface of it in terms of the accelerometers, haven't really delved deep into understanding how accelerometers are and knowing their capabilities, allowing you to really expand on your own concepts by utilizing this. You know, if you look at like how conjuring, you can do pretty much what everyone else is doing in terms of the basics, but with the addition of sequencing, light changes, it brings out a different dynamic. And that's where I feel like accelerometers can do the same thing. You know, it's just, I feel like we just need to get enough people behind it to really actually like sit down and really discuss and talk about things they have learned by utilizing it, and, you know, exchanging ideas. Because I feel like when it comes to the accelerometer, it's kind of like how gloving was at its beginning. You know, it's all just about fast movements and how big circles you can make before, you know, somebody really started adding a form of structure and a form of discipline, basically. You know, I feel like that's where accelerometers are at right now, is that, you know, we have this new toy and it brings out such a huge slew of possibilities that we can do now. It's just, you know, for a lot of people, that's just a lot to take on, you know. But that's one of the things I feel like maybe people just need to do more often, is literally just tinker with your lights and learn the ins and outs of your light's capabilities so you can understand them better. And not only that, but you can apply what their restrictions are to your show so you can utilize them better. One of the many people I listen to who also happens to be a Magic the Gathering card creator known as Mark Rosewater, he's often talked about how restriction breeds creativity. And knowing the limitations of your lights will help you be more creative of how to go about things, whether you get around certain things or you bypass certain things or you create something completely never been created before through just happenstance. That's where I want a lot of my listeners to start really focusing on, is actually really just delving into your capabilities of your lights so you can utilize them to their full potential. Now, I know a lot of people are probably going to sit there and be like, you're crazy. What are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense. But believe me, having a strong understanding of your chips and their capabilities is going to really excel your craft as a glover altogether. It's one of the things that I've actually kind of been trying to push on now, is people understanding how lights work and how the nature of lights work, because it's something that we use all the time for our performances, but how can you fully utilize something that you don't fully understand? If you catch where I'm going with that, right? So I'm just hoping that my listeners really start taking that into consideration and really kind of sit down for a moment and really think about how their lights work and what are they capable of doing. Now, I have a few ideas to help expand on the capabilities of accelerometers. Now, some of the things I'm going to suggest probably is able to be replicated by how they are right now. However, I feel like, pushing the envelope and trying out new things is always going to help us find a point where it's easily accessible and easily manageable and not going too far outside of the box. Okay. So an idea that I came up with as I was sitting there thinking about it was what I like to call a multi-flash combo setup. Now, kind of bear with me here. I know it's going to be a little confusing, but try to bear with me here on this, okay? So we're just going to use the 3-color setup since it's the most basic one, and it's usually what most people do anyways. So in a 3-color setup, what I would like to see from an accelerometer is where it's mixing flashing patterns together with the lights or the colors, if that makes sense. So, for example, the first color would be on a DOPS flash pattern setting, okay? And then your second color, let's just say hyperstrobe. So it creates this dash dot effect, okay? And then couldn't really think of a way to actually like blend them into a third type setup. So the third color would turn it into a tracer. So as your one speed, you're on one setting, and then you add a different flashing pattern combo into your first color light with the second color, so you make pretty much a second flashing pattern. And then once you get to the highest speed, it turns into another flashing pattern altogether. Now, I understand people are like, well, you can kind of do that, but I don't know exactly if there's the flash patterns of dash dot in all of these newer sets. I am planning on getting my hands on these sets so I can actually break them down and give you guys a detailed analysis about them. However, something like that would be really, really cool, where your each individual color falls under a specific flashing pattern. Now, you don't have to use tracer on the third one. I couldn't really think of anyone that would blend really well, but it was just an idea that I kind of came up with. So, something like that would be awesome, in my opinion. It would be really, really cool to see. One major thing that I would like to see from the accelerometers is to incorporate a setting of impact velocity. Now, if you don't know what impact velocity is, it is literally just a unit of measurement to measure the impact, and it's on direction, force, all that stuff, rate of speed, blah, 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 blah. Basically, when it comes to an impact velocity setting, is that it will only activate if they have a certain level of impact. So a very basic example that I can think of when it comes to using an impact velocity as a way to change the lights is like clapping your hands together. Just having your hands slap together once and they will change. Now, I do want to stress this, that when you're using an impact velocity setting and you go to change it, it's not going to change back like the speed settings would do. The only way you can change back to your previous sequence is you slap them again. That's something I really, really want to see outside of accelerometers, because it brings on a very basic way to change your lights. But, with my experience playing around with the Element V1s, yes, I know that there are V2s. At the time when I was tinkering with these, my younger brother had the V1s. They didn't come out with the V2s just yet. But from my experience, when I was playing around with them, I had him just choose one of his modes, and I just asked him, hey, just change all of them to the highest speed setting. Okay, because what he was telling me is that once you get to the second sequence, you have to reach back to a certain speed in order for it to turn back. And so what I was doing with that is I would tinker with learning, how fast I have to move to change it, and then keep it at that speed and see how fast I can slow down before it changes back. So I learned my parameters of the light, okay? But the thing I wanted to try out, because it was the first thing that popped in my head, was smashing my hands together, with the fingers interwoven together, that classic little chomp, chomp, chomp look with your hands. What I wanted to do was to use the changing the sequences of that with the impact velocity idea I had to accentuate, a crescendo in the song. So, a classic example when it comes to EDM is a nice little build up before you hit the drop. You have that crescendo to send the drop off, right? So, I would sit there and be listening to the build up. I would anticipate, and as soon as the crescendo goes, I would smash my hands together. The sequences, all of the lights would change at the same time. Now, I will admit, when I was practicing with this before I actually gave the show, I would clap my hands together and only a couple of them would change. So you're definitely going to have to practice on this to really make sure that you're consistent on changing all of your lights, because with like my hands, they're really gangly, so they don't sit flat on each other unless I actually really push like my wrists to touch each other. So you definitely need to learn where your parameters are and how things are going to work before you actually really give a show, right? So when the build-up was happening, I was getting ready. I was kind of moving my hands around, getting the whole display of displaying the build-up basically. And then when I had a nice little pause, I moved my hands away from each other so it would be nice and dark. And then once it clashed, my hands clashed, and all of a sudden the sequences changed, and it was a whole new thing. And I kept trying to keep them in the second sequence as much as possible before I slow down enough where it goes back to the first sequence. Okay, that's something I want to see out of accelerometers, because it's a very simple way of doing it. Where people can actually just do that. It will tail into musicality and how people can utilize it for their show. And also, it just, there's some people who just want to change all their lights all at the same time. This is a very simple and easy way to do so without having them to change each light individually. Now, I will certainly say I like the whole idea of where you're holding your lights in front of your viewer, and you do like maybe a dialing sequence where you're changing the light all in front of the person. That's something I've still been working on. I'm still kind of figuring it out, because there's so many different avenues that you can take with it. So that's something I would like to see out of accelerometers. Another really cool way, especially when it comes to the impact velocity setting, is synchronizing your lights. So what do I mean by synchronizing lights? Is basically like, if you have it on the impact velocity setting, you clap your hands and it syncs all your lights together. The purpose for this, a great example of its purpose, in my opinion, would be like morph strobe. I would like to actually have my lights be synced up when they're morphing between colors. So all my lights would be, just using the RGB example, it would start red, then morph into green, then morph into blue. I would like to see all my lights keep up at the same time and change like that. To me, it would look a lot cooler. So having this synchronized setting where, let's just say you're using all morph strobe, and you just clap your hands together and they instantly reset themselves to start from the beginning, therefore synchronizing themselves. Again, it's the whole clapping your hand things together. Definitely got to work on how you can do that where all your lights are consistently changing with each other. So Other ideas I had coming out of this was like adaptable lights. Now, kind of follow me on this, but the accelerometer adapts to your speed and the velocity that you're moving on each individual light, because certain fingers can move a lot faster than the other ones. Like your index finger could probably move a lot faster in terms of velocity than your pinky, so them able to adapt to which finger that they're on probably would help a lot more in terms of when you're moving your hands around and all, instead of having just one turn and all the other ones stay on the first sequence. They can be adaptable to where if you move everything and you try to move it fast enough, it can actually adapt and pick up when you want to change to your second sequence, so all of your lights change at the same time. Granted, I'm probably reaching out in the far reaches of space about these ideas, but it's just things that I've been thinking of. Flash pattern adaptability is probably another great example of things that work. Now, what I mean by flash pattern adaptability, like, let's just say like your lowest settings on DOPS, and then you get a little bit faster, maybe it changes into just a regular strobe, where, and then when you start going really, really fast, it turns into a hyperstrobe, so you get those elongated, the elongated dashes. So it's kind of reflecting your speed. Now I know a lot of people are probably going to say, well, you can do that with how you program it, but again, I mean, with it just adapting to the speed to kind of keep the consistency, you know what I mean? I know it's kind of convoluted what I'm trying to think of, but it's something I was sitting there thinking of that would be really, really cool, that, with how each individual light's moving in the space, that their flashing patterns would just simply adapt to their speed, so kind of brings the level of cohesion, if that makes any sense. So that's basically what I have about accelerometers. I feel like they are rather underutilized, and I kind of find that as a crime shame, because you have this massive dynamic now with gloving introducing accelerometers that I just want to see more of this. I want to see people actually reaching out and talking about this and discussing this, and just talking about how, what are ways that they can possibly utilize it. And not only that, but actively test your hypothesis, find what works for you, find what hasn't worked for you, and then share this knowledge with your fellow glovers, because with enough information being shared, especially in today's information age where, information can be shared just on a dime, this is something I feel like as a community we should be doing for each other, because this will not only solidify certain staples of gloving, but it's going to open new doors and new avenues where people can really branch off and create archetypes of their own. For crying out loud, we have teleporting as its own archetype now because of accelerometers. That's something I like to see. I want to see more of it, though, and I'm not saying just teleporting. I want to see more archetypes be created by the accelerometer existing, okay? And as much as everyone wants to say, well, some things just don't work out that way, I totally understand. That's the beauty about trial and error. You put in some money to see if it works, and if it doesn't work, that's fine. You now have the information to know what not to do. Like, for crying out loud, look at Thomas Edison. He didn't fail at making the light bulb 2,000 times. He found 2,000 different ways to not make one. That's the idea that you should be looking at here, okay? But other than that, that's pretty much all I have for this episode. Once again, I am extremely, extremely appreciative and thankful for everyone who has interacted with me on this question about this topic. Once again, Squirtle, thank you so much for giving me the insight that I actually needed, because I just felt like I wasn't getting anywhere with my own research. So from somebody from Futuristic Lights, where their biggest proponent is being the accelerometer, thank you so much for actually clarifying a lot of things for me. It was extremely helpful. So I'm going to pass this off to you guys. What do you guys think about the accelerometer? Do you guys feel like I do, where it's a little bit underutilized? Do you feel like people just aren't giving it enough stock to actually really delve into it? Do you feel like just using it as a form of practice of speed control is just kind of a waste? Where do you guys stand on accelerometers? What do you guys like about accelerometers? What do you guys wish to see come out from from using these. I would love to hear you guys' feedback. Where you can hit me up is very simple. You can hit me up on the Facebook page, which is aptly named The Gloving Paradigm. You can also hit me up at my email directly, which is muttonchopguy@gmail.com. You can also find me on Reddit under the username muttonchopguy. And of course, I have my Discord server, which the link will be in this episode's description. You have all those places you can hit me up and talk to me directly. I've actually had somebody talk to me directly about accelerometers and things like that. And when I was talking to him about archetypes, because I was explaining to him about the archetypes he was using, he's like, well, where are these archetypes? Where's anyone talked about them? Well, I talked about them because archetypes is just a word for a very typical model. So I shared him the 2 episodes about archetypes of gloving. Okay. So, I'm starting to get more interaction from you guys, which is very good for me. It helps me really try to bring more cohesion to these episodes. I can't thank you guys enough for actually listening and interacting with me and talking to me about these topics. If it wasn't for you guys, I really wouldn't have a whole lot to talk about. So, once again, thank everyone for interacting with me and talking to me about this stuff. I highly, highly appreciate it. It's just been so refreshing actually hearing back from everybody on topics. So, those are the places you can hit me up. Do not be shy. I am not a type of person who will immediately tell you that you're wrong. I will simply just discuss with you on ways of thinking when it comes to gloving. I'm more than willing to help you guys with tips and tricks that I've learned over the years. All you gotta do is just ask me. Ask and ye shall receive. That's basically what I'm trying to do here. So that is all for my episode. Thank you guys so much for listening. I am your host, Peter, aka LPD8 Dubuque, and I'll see you guys all next week.